right. What is good, y'all? Welcome to Making the Walk podcast. I'm Antoine. First off, thank you to our subscribers, to those viewing for the first time. Of course, remember to like and subscribe. And of course, we really appreciate it. Today, we are starting a new series called 5 Questions. And on this particular series, we're going to talk to and have insightful dialogue with valuable members of the MMA community. And so today we're going to kick off the series, and we have a really solid thing to kick it off. Just to kind of tee it up, he's a veteran MMA writer and interviewer with content currently on UFC.com, which is the very entity that this entire platform is built on. He's a veteran MMA analyst and breaking down fights and overall organizational concepts. And of course, he's a thought leader in our space. So he's from Keyboard Kimura. We have Spencer Kyte. What's good, man?
That was a hell of an intro. I'm gonna have to clip that and like just put some of that in the Twitter bio now of like thought leader in this space. That was amazing. Man. Thank you for having me, man.
All true. So let me set the stage for this entire conversation. So me being a former MMA writer, not to your ilk, but I've done a little bit of writing myself in the past. I like to look out for what writers are saying. I enjoy their content and their conversation, from the Luke Thomases, the Danny Seguras, the Chuck Mindenhalls. And so I found Spence on UFC.com. And of course, I read through the article, and I'm like, let me dig further into this guy. And so I go into Twitter and I follow, and I read the things that you post and comment, like all those good things. And one that particularly stood out to me was, and I'll read it verbatim. It says, amidst all the main event talk and 290 announcements, I again don't see anyone lobbying for that card not to be as insanely stacked as it is to benefit these other surrounding cards. Several of those fights could be headlining other shows. So this stood out to me. It piqued my interest because my co-host, CJ, this is something that we've already talked about. Not on the show, but just away from the show. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, yeah, no, I got to talk to him about this. And so my first question is, regarding that statement, what problem do you think that is causing, and who do you think that is causing problems for?
So I think it depends whose angle you're looking at it from, right? Because from the UFC standpoint, it's not causing any problems. UFC 290 is massive. It's going to do tremendous numbers. Everybody's going to be engaged and excited about it, as we all are, rightfully. Mm-hmm. And the surrounding events are still going to sell well. People are still going to attend them if they're on the road. We have the pay-per-view here the month before, just in Vancouver. People will be there. It will be attended. People will turn out. There's going to be fight night events around it. People are going to show up to those. People are going to watch them. People are going to hate tweet about them, all of those things. So it's not going to cause any problems for the UFC. Their business is going to roll on as it always does.
Right.
The people that I think are having problems with it are the fan base, the audience, the media, people in that group that want to see different, better, greater, but only want to see the construction of different, better, greater under terms that they would like.
Right.
There's no willingness to this isn't a negotiation with them. It's, these are my demands, and if you can't meet them, we're out. And to that comment, somebody responded like, people would rather see 1A+ show than 4Bs. And my response was, well, the 4 shows are happening. This is a fact. They are on the schedule. They aren't being canceled. Mm-hmm. And so I would rather have an A, a couple of Bs, and if I got to have a C or a D in there, fine. I don't need A+ and then 3 C- that everybody's angry about.
Yeah.
That said, I'm also the guy that like finds 10 things I like about every single fight card because I like every single fight card. But I
Yeah.
understand I understand I'm an outlier in that regard. But that's sort of the origins of that thought, is just like, I get where, and I get it, right? I understand where people are coming from. It's hard to see some of these events that aren't as filled out the way people would like them to be. But this is
Yeah.
this is the machine we're living in.
True. And so, like for me, just kind of the origins of when I started to get into the sport, I came from watching WEC, and I go into that not knowing anybody. I don't know anyone.
Right.
And when I watch the card, I'm like, man, this is good from top to bottom.
Right.
And then I start to learn these people's stories, and then that's how I get engaged. And the next thing you know, I'm seeing these people who were early on in the card now headlining cards, and so you're basically kind of growing up with the fighters, right? And so I think that from us, being people who are diehards, we're in the space. um I feel like we kind of look at it a little bit differently, but when we see things like, and this is no shade to them at all, but Song Yadong against Ricky Simone headlining a card, we kind of questioned it a little bit, because I do think that they should be pushed up and highlighted by the promotion, but at the same time, I feel like maybe them being the third on a fight night, or the co-main on the fight night, would be more appropriate, and pushing somebody that, maybe the Robert Whitaker against Dricus Duplessis, that should be the headliner of that
For
card.
sure.
So and then, situations where we have ranked fighters, and I mean ranked in the top 5, like Brandon Royval, um, in the prelims, that's, come on, like that,
Yeah.
it
Agreed.
doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem level, when we're looking at these cards holistically, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And I'm glad that Dana, like, that's been one. I know Aaron Bronstetter from TSN up here in Canada sat down with Dana last week, I believe, and was like, so how does the matchmaking in terms of where they're going to lay out? And he was like, no, we screwed up with that Royval fight. Like, that was, we really dropped the ball on that one. That should have been on the main card. And like, I appreciate him saying it, but at the same time, there needs to be someone earlier in the process that is like, hey, this can't be on the prelims. Like, you got to move this around. This has to be, the winner of this is maybe fighting for a title. Like, if something happens to
Yeah.
Pantoja, Brandon Royval's fighting in July, he can't be on the prelims of, admittedly, I think it was the Kansas City show, right? So it was an
Hmm.
ESPN show. So it's on a major platform, but still it's on the prelims. And there are people that just don't tune into the prelims. And so
Yep.
they need to understand that element of things as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure from a UFC standpoint, it makes it more difficult to sell a fight if the casual viewer, the person that only sees the main card, doesn't know who Brandon Royval is, because
100%.
they don't watch the prelims. Like, that's not fair to Brandon, and that's not
Yeah.
fair just to flyweights in general. They Oh my gosh, they do flyweights so wrong. They complain about the division not being cultivated and having eyes on it, but then you bury these contenders further down in the cards, on fight night cards at that. Like, it just doesn't, those two things don't align, in
Right.
my opinion.
I agree. I agree completely. I mean, we see it with, I mean, there's probably one fight on every fight card where we're like, this should maybe replace something on the main card. This should maybe, I don't think there is this week because it's a lesser card. It's just another one of those cards where we've had a bunch of changes and we've had some fights pulled and moved and things of that nature. But like,
Mm-hmm.
more weeks than others, you'll see one fight and be like, why is this on the prelims, and that heavyweight fight that is going to be ugly is sitting in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the main card? Like, let's switch those around and get the flow of things and get the introduction to these people, because that's, to me, that's part of it as well. And it's a great point that you bring up of like, there are a lot of people that either still only watch the main card or equate value with bout order and card placement, and
Yeah.
can't just look beyond it and be like, right, but that's a really good fight, even if it's on the prelims. And
Yeah.
so eliminate that if you can. do yourself the favor of just putting Brandon Royval and Matthias Nicolau on the main card so we don't have to have this conversation.
Exactly. And I know that there's revisionist history where we look at fights like the Kron Gracie and Charles Jourdain fight, and we say, okay, that shouldn't have been there. But you know, that's not necessarily fair to the matchmakers. They didn't know that was going to happen, but at the same time, there's different ways of handling situations. Just like looking at that card, the 290 card specifically, when we talk about taking fights from that particular card and moving them to headline other cards, what fights stand out on that particular card to you,
Right.
that could headline something
So
else?
I'm consulting the phone. That's why I'm looking down, just
Oh
so that I
no, no
have
doubt.
everything, just so that I have
Eh,
everything with me.
you don't know every fight off the top of your head.
Surprisingly, no. I mean, if you really wanted to, Brandon Moreno and Alexandre Pantoja could headline an event, right? They could be a main event. There would be people that complain because flyweights are headlining a pay-per-view or whatever, but like that could headline a pay-per-view. We've seen it before.
Yeah.
Deiveson Figueiredo has done it. Valentina Shevchenko has done it. We could do it again. Robert Whittaker
big enough in the South to do that.
Yeah. Robert Whittaker, Dricus Duplessis, as you said. I think you could do Jalen Turner and Dan Hooker on a fight night show. Like, if you do Whittaker and Duplessis on like a show like This Weekend, which is ABC, or a couple weeks ago, ESPN, you could do Jalen Turner and Dan Hooker on a fight night show, either at the Apex or on the road somewhere where it's broadcasting on ESPN Plus. Like, that's the kind of fight, to me, I want to see Jalen Turner get that opportunity. I know Dan Hooker a little bit. He's enough of a name. He's been in there with enough good people that the hardcore set is going to be like, no, this is a great fight. This is going to be violence. Tune in. I wouldn't be mad at Sean Brady and Jack Della Maddalena headlining a fight night show. Same thing, like showcase this up and coming talent in Della, who is 4-0 in the UFC now, all finishes, all in the first round, looks legit, and is facing a guy that up until last October was the rising star of the division and isn't anymore because he lost to the guy that's going to fight for the title next. Shouts to Bilal Muhammad. And then, so those are the ones. And I think there's a couple others that, aren't announced or aren't on here, but like that's 3 or 4 fights that are going to be on the prelims. That, look, it makes 290 just an amazing day. You sit down and from start to finish, it's just a terrific day. But like the offshoot of that is the Saturday before and the Saturday after, when there are fight cards, aren't going to be anywhere near as good. Or 2 weeks down the line, 3 weeks down the line, there's just not the wealth of big fights that people are going to be excited for. I'm going to love them. I'm going to be excited for whatever's on the docket. I'm a weirdo. I get it. But the masses are going to be like, man, this card sucks. And it's like, cool, but that one was amazing. So what's the trade-off? How do we remedy these things?
Yeah, I mean, and I too am a weirdo. I'm going to be there and watching and, just like a little kid, looking at every fight that happens. So specifically looking at earlier in that card, and this is the one that I was kind of the most disappointed in, with Robbie Lawler against Nico Price being his retirement fight. And I just don't, I feel like he deserves a better send off than being this. Now, the bout order could change,
right?
But from the looks of it, it looks like he's going to be very early in the card, and that just doesn't seem right for a former champion. In his last fight, his last hurrah, to be this early in the card.
Perfect fight to have as the co-main event on an ESPN show or a fight night event where you can make a big deal about Robbie Lawler, have the promo packages in there. And I'm sure they'll do something nice. And I know he's going into the Hall of Fame the day before, which is great. They'll run the Hall of Fame package, the whole 9 yards. He'll get an interview one way or the other. But as to what you're saying, like, spend more of the event celebrating this guy that, was in the UFC when he was 20 years old, and his journey to get to the belt was such a crazy journey. And like, to finally get there, we all saw it We all remember it. And then had a fight that's going into the Hall of Fame this year. Like, this is a really cool opportunity. I get wanting to celebrate it sort of Hall of Fame weekend, but you can push it a week either way and it still works the same, and give him a different position instead of, probably the 6th or 7th fight of the night. Maybe the main event of the prelims, as Dana likes to call it, the final prelim of the night. But
the featured prelim.
The featured prelim, yes.
Oh my goodness, man! Chris Curtis, I talked to him. He was so upset about that. But
yeah, I have a feeling Kurt's not going to be happy about not being on the main card up here in Vancouver.
That's just
it's
bizarre. It's bizarre to me.
It's bizarre, and I say this as a Canadian because I understand the UFC's. So it seems like their international approach is everybody from that nation needs to be on the main, like the main card needs to feature one person from that nation. We're not that country. We're just not. We ain't got the talent, and there's not people in Vancouver that are like, how dare you disrespect Marc-Andre Barrios by not having him on the main card. Put the best fights on the main card. Like Mike Malott and Adam Fugit, fine. Mike's on a nice winning streak. Adam's from just across the border in Washington State. Makes sense. Chris Curtis and Nasruddin Imavov should be on the main card. Like, absolutely. Open the main card with that fight. People will be excited.
Absolutely, because it's going to be a scrap. So that's just odd to me. But I mean, I understand where they're coming from because it did kind of work in the past. But I don't know.
Yeah, we're just not that country. We're just not. We're not. We are loyal when it's the country playing for something, competing for something. But when it's like dude from Quebec fighting Eric Anders, people aren't going to be like up in arms and dire to see that fight, especially in Vancouver. No disrespect to the big city down the road, but they're terrible sports fans. They're trash.
Yeah, man. So my next question. So since the philosophy, we know it's obviously changed, and I don't know if it's changed because I'm deeper into the sport or if it actually has changed, but at least from my perspective, it feels like the philosophy on matchmaking has changed. So previously, the company, they were focused on making sure the cards maintain a certain level of star power in the main event slot. But do you think that that's just my perception, or do you think that it really has changed, that they don't focus on that star power in the main event slot?
I think it's changed in the sense that there are more tiers of fights now, right? So we have pay-per-views. The level at the top of a pay-per-view is always the same. You're going to get a championship fight, if not two. And if on the odd occasion that you don't, it's ideally going to be a big fight that has some real pull. You could argue that, Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington last year wasn't quite big enough. But we've seen, right? Like, I think back to Anderson Silva, Nick Diaz. Like, you don't need a title to get people invested in that fight. People are in.
Yeah.
And then you look at the ESPN shows, the ABC shows. I think the tier has changed a little bit there from the Fox days, where we used to get some title fights and we would get sort of title eliminators. This weekend's a great example. It's not a title eliminator. The winner is going to have to win one, if not two more fights to fight for the title.
Yep.
It's a good way to introduce Jailton Almeida, who I think dominates the fight and gets a victory, but it's still one of those, you need him a little bit further along. So I think the quality of that one could be upped a little. And then the fight night shows are more sort of those. This main event this weekend feels almost more like it's geared towards those fight night shows, whether they're in the Apex or they're on the road, where it's contenders, but guys that aren't quite there yet, like Ricky Simone and Song Yadong a couple weeks ago, as you mentioned earlier. Yes, it got moved because of some changes to stuff, but to me, that's the right sort of spot for those guys. Need to get them a little bit more exposure. Ricky Simone was on a good run. Song Yadong was coming off a main event. Yeah, it was a loss, but it was because of a cut and he was ready to go still, no matter the fact that he was busted up and had a broken orbital and the whole nine against Corey Sandhagen. So that to me is is sort of the right level for them. But it certainly has changed. I also just think that like generally perception and people's overall acceptance, appetite, I don't know what the right word is, but like I know for myself, I'm 44. I've been covering the sport for 14 years. My life is drastically different now at 44, 14 years in than it was
Mm-hmm.
at 30 when I was getting going and I had time to know everybody and I had time to be really invested in everybody. And
Yeah.
so I think some of the criticism and sort of frustration with some of this stuff is just that people are aging out and they don't want to age out, or they don't want to like they don't have the time anymore, which is perfectly fine and acceptable and understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow that's become the UFC's responsibility to change things so that they can still experience it and enjoy it the way that they want. And the UFC, whatever they're doing, they just do it to cater to everybody. And this is not how businesses work,
Yeah, that's true.
especially this one.
Yeah, very much so. This one, very much so. This one. So, I kind of echo that. I mean, I haven't been watching and invested as long as you, but it's been what year is this?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going back
It's
to
been about
WC
it's
days,
been
it's pretty close.
yeah, it's been a long time.
It catches
It's
up
been a
on you,
while.
right? Like I have to do the
Yeah.
math. The only reason I know how many years it is because I launched the blog, like the original version of Keyboard Kimura, the week
Mm-hmm.
after I got back from getting married. And we celebrated 14 years a couple weeks ago. So that's how I keep these things in line of knowing where everything is.
See, now I'm thinking about it. Like, how long has it been? Like, I think my first few events involved Jamie Varner. Jamie Varner
Yeah.
was so that has to be quite a bit ago.
Yep.
And I
It's
watched it because it was
longer
free.
than you think. It's longer than you remember, sir.
Maybe so. Maybe so. That's crazy. I
Pull
didn't even
this
think
up
about it.
now.
Who was Jamie? So yeah, I
So
go
like
back
Jamie
to
Varner in the championship days in the
yes.
WEC.
Like, do you remember the controversy with the gloves and I'm trying to think of it was something that they said was in his glove. Um, I can't remember if it was like plaster or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, so like back then that, and I think that's why I've been so romantic about Cowboy Cerrone and Benson Henderson and Anthony
So I
Pettis.
mean, Varner Cowboy 1
Yeah.
was on January 25th, 2009.
Oh shit.
We've been watching this for a minute.
Dang, I didn't realize it's
Yeah,
been that long.
it catches up. This is where I do the like sit down with one of these guys and do like, well, I've been watching you for this long. So that means you've
Yeah.
been doing this for that long and a little bit longer. You're
Yeah.
old. And I get to preface it all with like, I'm always older than everybody. So like when I talk to you about age, I got years on everyone except for Glover and Arlovsky. But like everybody else, it's like, you're old now. I am too,
Like,
but you're old
sit down,
and you're
young man.
fighting.
Let me talk to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
That's crazy. No, I mean I'm right behind you. I'm 43, so
All right.
but I mean I guess I just didn't realize it's
Yeah,
been
it just
long.
goes.
Yeah, it does. So getting back to what we're talking about as far as the who this is affecting, and this is kind of a loaded question because we kind of alluded to it maybe, but um I think it's almost a universal opinion that the bantamweight division is the best division in the UFC. But so I don't think that they would be the answer to this question. But who do you think, or what division do you think suffers the most, men and women, to this kind of change or this new philosophy of how they're handling the matchmaking?
I think we can always stand to see more female fights gain prominence. I think there's some really great fights, some really great matchups, some really great talent in the strawweight and flyweight divisions. Specifically, bantamweight has gotten a bit thin and lost some appeal, and featherweight is just a division on paper. But I mean, you already mentioned flyweights, right? Like flyweights can always be further up the card. They're submit, like, if you had made that Brandon Royval Matthias Nicolau fight a main event, I'm not mad at it. I know hardcore fans aren't mad at it. And sure, there's going to be some people that want to push back and say, who are these two? I don't like these little guys, as they always do with flyweights. And we got it last year with Armin Saryukin and Mateusz Gamrot, which ended up being an amazing fight. And then Gamrot went on to fight Benny in Abu Dhabi, which was another great fight. And like, people have now realized, oh, this was a really good fight. And they're both really great. Like, sometimes the UFC has to bite that bullet and just do it and just force it upon people. And so I think it's the flyweights. I think it's the women's division. I think we could do with fewer heavyweight main events. I think we could do with fewer of these same middleweights getting rolled out. And I say that as somebody that understands booking Sean Strickland and Abus Magomedov. I understand the logic behind it, but I think we could do with a little bit less from the middleweights and a little more from the flyweights, the bantamweights, and the women's side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're trying to educate the casual viewer, when you're looking at the smaller weight classes, they tend to be more technical. Those are just the facts. You don't get as many knockouts, but you're going to get precision striking. You're going to get crazy transitions and crazy scrambles, and you're going to get submissions. So like, you're going to educate the viewer when you show the smaller weight classes. And then on top of that, we just had a bantamweight be the main event. So we're just talking 10 less pounds. So
yeah.
I mean, it can be done. Even if it's a fight night, it can be done. I think that they're just, for whatever reason, they have something that they're holding over the flyweight division. But they're still pushing, but the UFC is not making it easy on them. That's for sure.
No, and to me, I think it goes back to the DJ days, right, where the pay-per-view numbers were never that great and the Fox numbers were never that great. But that's a decade ago in some instances, or not quite. But like, those were great. A lot of those were great fights, and a lot of the reason that they were one-sided matchups was because the division was still relatively new, and DJ was that damn good. He was just running through everybody. Like, you put him in there with Joe Benavidez twice in about a year. And so the number 2 guy can't just be constantly fighting him, although Max Holloway has proven otherwise at featherweight over the last couple of years. But like, that was part of the reason, right? So then you got this division that people, generally speaking, broad strokes here, look at and go, well, I'm not afraid of that guy, right? That's often the logic, is like, heavyweights, I'm not going to say anything about, because those big boys could knock me out. We're used to seeing big human beings smashing other people. When we see DJ, who is a dork that streams and is tiny, but could kick your ass in a heartbeat and throw you up in the air and catch your arm on the way down like he did to Ray Borg.
It's exactly what I was thinking.
For some reason, it doesn't resonate. It never made sense to me. And the UFC still seems to have that, like, people just don't like them. Fine. But if you give them that exposure to it, and sometimes there's going to be MMA fans that hear this that don't like me saying it, but like, sometimes it doesn't matter if the casual fans like it or not, or the masses agree to it or not. You have to put the best fights out there and put the best fights forward. And if that's Brandon Royval and Matthias Nicolau a couple of weeks ago being a main event somewhere, it's got to be a main event, because you need these people to be recognizable and known and appreciated for when we get to Brandon Moreno against Brandon Royval, or Alexandre Pantoja against Brandon Royval, and you're trying to sell that fight. Like, you've got to be thinking 2-3 fights down the line with most of these athletes.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that.
And that's the matchmaking, that's the card placement piece of it that sticks in my head all the time, is like, you need to be looking at, okay, where does this person end up if they win 2 more fights? So if they're on the prelims this week and it's their 3rd win or their 4th win, now they break into the rankings. Then they need to be on the main card against this kind of person. Then they need to be probably the co-main event on a fight night card. Then they need to be showcased on a, we got to get going a little bit faster or else we end up with like Bilal Muhammad winning 10 straight or undefeated in 10 straight, sitting in the co-main event and people being like, this fight is just kind of, it's like, no, this fight is great. Bilal's amazing. I don't know what you've been watching and what more you want him to do.
Seriously. So, yeah, no, I think we've pretty much gone through this particular topic, but I want to dive more into you before we get out of here. I know that you have the Keyboard Kimura site or not site, but show. So, like, tell me about that and what you're looking to do with that.
So a couple of years ago, I launched a Substack newsletter, spencerkyte.com, spencerkyte.substack.com. Thank you for allowing me to plug things. Just as a spot for me to write the stuff that I don't write for the UFC website. So I've been a freelance contributor to the UFC website for over a decade now. I do interviews, I do feature stuff every week, fight by fight preview, fighters on the rise, things like that. Everything else I do on my Substack. And for a good 18 months, it was just written. And then a friend of mine, Harry Powell from Severe MMA, was like, yeah, nobody likes to read anymore. Stop wasting your time. Stop being an old and get on YouTube. And I was like, yeah, I just don't like it. I'd rather write. And he's like, right, but wouldn't you rather spend an hour doing a video than 3 hours writing one question for every fight where you're getting all your details out? And I was like, that's not a bad idea. And so launched the YouTube channel, now sort of integrate the two. The Substack has all the podcast feed, and then any written stuff that I do. So every weekend I'll do a recap running through with the event. If I want to do rewatches or things like that, those will be written, those will be up on the Substack. And then the YouTube channel is, yeah, just weekly videos of previewing events and betting show and things of that nature, where it's just sit down and have some fun and try to educate some people a little bit, try to make a few more people interested and excited about fights or fight cards or individuals that I'm looking forward to. Cause I think that's just part of it, right? Like for me, I've always been the guy that advocates that every fight matters, that every fighter's got a story, that there's something interesting kind of every step along the way, which led to doing a piece called One Question for Every Fight. Cause I have them. And so if I'm going to be the guy that's out here saying, no, you got to pay attention to every fight. Like this is why you feel caught off guard by some of these people. This is why you feel like so-and-so came out of nowhere and what happened? How are they suddenly fighting for a title? Like I remember when Zhang Weili fought for the title, I had people that I know and respect and I'm friends with be like, yeah, but it was rushed and nobody knew her and she hadn't really. And I was like, she was on the main card of a John Jones pay-per-view wrecking somebody before this, like beating Tisha Torres before this. What more does she need to do to fight for a title? Like it's 3 straight wins. It's 20 wins overall. Like we're good, aren't we? Can we just, and so that's the extreme case, but like somewhere down the line, one of these people that is fighting on the prelims, one of these last couple of weeks is probably going to develop into a really good fighter and maybe a champion. And so to me, get in early, start paying attention, start building analysis and ideas about them and see where it goes. And if it doesn't pan out, I'm watching the fights anyways. I'm writing about them. I'm talking about them anyways. Why not share that with as many people as possible?
Totally agree. And I watched the one that you just recently posted too. I mean,
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate the subscription.
Like, yeah, for sure. And I mean, you, like you said, the question or the one thing that you put out there, it spurs into like a credible argument on your take on the actual fight itself, and you couple that with the insight that you have from actually speaking to some of the fighters. Like it really helps people who may not be in the know get in the know. So no, I really dig what you're doing.
I appreciate that, man. And that's sort of the thing, right? I know that I'm in a position, I'm really fortunate to every week get to talk to a handful of athletes every pay-per-view, kind of whenever I need to reach out to coaches, reach out to whoever, and just sit down and talk about this sport with a lot of, you know, accomplished, dedicated people. If I can take that and share that to people that enjoy this sport and want to hear more than just what they're getting in other places,
Mm-hmm.
that's what it's about. And if I can help people move forward, if I can have conversations, let's go. This is I mean, I'm sitting at home on a beautiful sunny day in the middle of May, like it could be way worse. So I'm going to be excited about it, and I'm going to share that positivity and that excitement with as many people as want to listen. And it's a small group right now. I love that small group. If it doesn't grow any bigger, that's cool. We've got our little community. I'd like for it to get bigger. I want more people to follow and pay attention and, you know, learn something about some of these athletes, but we'll build slowly. We're okay with that.
Yeah, no, it's gonna grow. Oh, I can guarantee it's
I
gonna
hope
grow.
so. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. Ours is growing, and I'm super appreciative for the people who've jumped on. And I mean, it's been really cool just to see the growth, and I'm hoping and wishing the same thing for yours as well.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And if there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate. Hit me up. We are now connected. And
Yeah,
so anytime for anything.
cool, man. I appreciate that, man. So with that, I will close the show, man. I definitely appreciate Spence jumping on. For everybody else, like I said, like, subscribe. We're gonna continue to throw out more content. I got some bantamweight things that I want to talk about coming up in light of what just happened with Aljamain Sterling, Sugar Sean O'Malley, and of course Marab Dawalish-Willie. That Thriller Jacket drama was nuts. So, but yeah, until then, we'll see y'all.